Sable Wynrow knew the desert the way some folks knew a prayer. Every ridge line, every fold of shadow, every narrow cut where a man could disappear and never be seen again. She had been raised beneath the unforgiving New Mexico sun, breathing dust, since she was old enough to sit a saddle. That same dust scraped her throat now as she urged her mare through the tight canyon, pass rifle steady across the saddle horn. "Easy, Cinder," she murmured, her hand sliding along the horse's neck. The mare's ears flicked forward, tense. Something was wrong. The air lay heavy and unmoving, too still. Even the cicadas had gone quiet. Sable tightened her grip on the rifle, blue eyes narrowing against the glare. She had no business riding this far from town alone. Sheriff Cole Hardin would be furious if he knew, but at 22 she was tired of being only the sheriff's daughter. Guarded, watched, boxed in. The faint trail she'd been following dissolved among scattered stones, forcing her to dismount and lead Cinder by the reins. 10 steps later she stopped cold. Dark stains marked the sand blood, fresh enough to shine under the sun. Her pulse jumped as she followed the red trail with her eyes to where it vanished behind a stand of scrub. Every sensible instinct told her to turn back to ride hard for town and fetch her father and the Canyon Ridge posse. Sheriff Hardin had filled her childhood with stories, Apache, ambushes settlers left broken beneath a sky that didn't care, especially now with Coda stirring fear across the territory. Her father's voice echoed in her head. But something else pulled at her, something she couldn't name. Blood meant injury, weakness. If someone was hurt, she couldn't walk away. Sable tied Cinder to a twisted juniper and moved forward, silent as breath. Her boots barely touched the sand. The rifle's weight steadied her as she pushed past the brush. What she saw stole her breath. A man lay slumped against the rock wall, one leg stretched wrong, the other bent beneath him. His chest lifted and fell in shallow, strained breaths. Blood soaked through a rough bandage on his thigh, and another dark line ran from a gash above his right temple. But it wasn't the wounds that made her finger tighten on the trigger. It was his face. High cheekbones, copper skin darkened by sun and wind, straight black hair spilling past his shoulders. Apache. His eyes snapped open, dark, sharp, fierce as a hawk's, and locked onto hers. A chill ran down Sable's spine despite the heat. They stared at each other unmoving, the desert holding its breath. His gaze dropped to her rifle and something shifted in his expression. Not fear, acceptance. That unsettled her more than panic ever could. "You are Sheriff Cole Hardin's daughter," he said quietly. His voice carried an accent, but the English was careful, deliberate. Not a question. A fact. Sable blinked. "How do you know who I am?" A faint, tired smile touched his mouth. "Everyone knows the blue-eyed daughter of the sheriff, the one who rides like she belongs in the saddle." He shifted, grimacing. "I have seen you at the trading post." From a distance, he added. She should have been alarmed by that. Instead, curiosity slipped past her caution. "You're bleeding badly." "Yes." Again that calm acceptance. "The bullet went through," he continued, "but the wound opened again." "I cannot travel farther today." Sable studied him more closely. His clothes were a mix: buckskin leggings, a worn cotton shirt torn at the shoulder, Apache and white man woven together. A knife sheath hung at his belt, empty. At his chest, half hidden beneath the fabric, something silver caught the light. Understanding struck her hard. The notices posted from Santa Fe to El Paso, the crude sketches, the description of a tall Apache carrying a stolen silver medallion, her father's ghost hunt. "Tarek," she whispered, lifting the rifle again. "The one they say led the raid on Fletcher Ranch. 15 dead." Something flashed in his eyes. Anger, pain, maybe both. "I am Tarek," he said evenly. "But I led no raid. That blood is not on my hands." Sable let out a sharp, bitter laugh. That's what every wanted man says. And yet he replied, watching her steadily. You have not shot me, nor ridden for your father. The truth of it struck her deeper than she liked. Why hadn't she? Reason screamed that he was dangerous. An enemy. The reward for him would fund the town's new schoolhouse twice over. But another voice, quiet, stubborn, told her something didn't add up. The man before her was wounded barely upright, yet he carried himself with a dignity that clashed with the savage monster from her father's stories. And in his eyes she saw pain, weariness, not the eyes of a butcher, and that was what frightened her most. But not the hollow, dead-eyed coldness she had seen in men who truly meant harm. You should, he said when her silence lingered. Your father would take pride in it. The great Tarek brought down by the sheriff's daughter. The faint bitterness in his voice struck a nerve. I don't need my father's approval to decide what's right, she shot back. Even as the words left her mouth, Sable Wynrow knew the truth was more complicated. Her whole life had been shaped beneath Sheriff Cole Hardin's shadow. Tarek studied her expression quietly. Then what will you choose, Sable Wynrow? Hearing her name on his tongue sent an unexpected tremor through her. The sensible answer was obvious. Ride home. Alert her father and the Canyon Ridge posse. This man was accused of horrors. Yet doubt pricked at her sharp and insistent. What if he wasn't lying? Her father's justice came fast and fatal, especially for an Apache. You'll die if that wound isn't treated right, she finally said, lowering the rifle a fraction. Yes. His calm acceptance of his own death unsettled her deeply. Sable made her choice in a single breath, knowing full well it might be reckless. There's an old line shack about half a mile east, she said. Used to belong to the Wilson spread before they sold out. Nobody goes near it now. Her tone stayed level, practical. If someone were to hide there, no one would find them. A flicker of surprise crossed his features. Why tell me this? I don't know, she admitted. Maybe because people deserve a fair chance before they're condemned. Or maybe I'm just being foolish. She stepped back, rifle still ready, but no longer aimed straight at him. Tarek braced himself against the rock and pushed upright with slow, controlled effort. Pain flashed across his face, swiftly masked, but she saw how much he leaned on his good leg. I need to get back before anyone notices I'm gone, she said. My father has men looking for you across the whole territory. They won't give me a second glance, but they'd drop you where you stand. Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Why risk yourself for someone you don't know, an enemy? Sable searched for an answer and found none certain. I don't know that you're either, she said softly. Not yet. She hesitated before adding, I'll return tomorrow with supplies. If you've moved on, then that's that. But if you're here... She let the unfinished thought hang in the tightening air. He said nothing for a long moment, holding her gaze with a steadiness that felt too direct, too revealing, like he could see past her practiced calm into the doubts beneath. Until tomorrow, Sable Wynrow, he said at last, the words carrying a weight that felt almost ceremonial. Maybe a promise, maybe a warning. As she rode toward town, the sunset stretching long shadows over the rugged land, Sable felt the certainty settle into her bones. She had just changed the direction of her life forever. Whether for good or ruin, she couldn't yet tell. The old line shack rose like a forgotten gravestone against the widening New Mexico sky. Its boards had faded to silver with age, the roof dipped where a beam had begun to rot. Sable approached slowly. The saddlebags weighed heavy with the supplies she'd stolen out of town. No movement. No hint the wounded Apache had made it here. Maybe he'd pushed on during the night, betting on the wilderness rather than trust the word of a sheriff's daughter. Or maybe the desert had claimed him where he'd fallen. The thought bothered her far more than she expected. She dismounted and tied Cinder to a stunted pine near a thin patch of grass. The mare nickered softly, sensing her rider's tension. Easy, girl, Sable murmured, stroking her neck before turning to the shack. Her hand drifted to the revolver at her hip. Her father's old Colt gifted on her 16th birthday. She had never drawn it in anger, but she knew she could if the moment came. The door hung ajar, creaking as she pushed it open. Inside, the dimness forced her eyes to adjust. Dust swirled through a shaft of light from the small window. A crude table, a broken chair, a narrow cot, empty. Disappointment swept through her, followed by frustration. What had she expected? That a hunted man would simply wait for her? You came. Sable spun, Colt raised in an instant. Tarek stood in the doorway of what had once been a storage room, his tall frame nearly blocking the entrance. He had fashioned a rough crutch from a broken fence post, easing the weight off his injured leg. In the dusky light, his features looked sharper, shadows carving along his cheekbones and jaw. I said I would, she replied, lowering the gun, though not holstering it. His gaze dropped briefly to the weapon, then returned to her face. Trust grows slowly between our peoples, he said. Can you blame us? The words slipped from her before she could stop them. No. He moved with deliberate care toward the table, leaning hard on the rough crutch he'd crafted. Just as you can't fault my people for defending what was theirs long before any borders were drawn. There was no heat in his tone, only a tired certainty that made arguing feel pointless. Sable Wynrow set her saddlebags down, fully aware of his sharp attention on every movement. I brought bandages, whiskey for cleaning the wound, jerky hardtack. She hesitated, then pulled out a wrapped bundle, and these. From the bottom of the bag she lifted a small oilcloth packet. Willow bark, for the pain. Agnes Crowley in town taught me how to use it. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. You know our medicines a little. Agnes. Our healer is half Mexican, half Pueblo. She's been in this land longer than any of us. Sable unwrapped the packet, revealing thin, curled strips. She treats the ones the doctor refuses to see. Tarek's expression softened a shade. Your father allows this. My father doesn't know everything I get up to. Sable met his gaze without flinching. Now let me look at that wound. He hesitated, and she understood too well. Letting her near it meant surrendering every defense he had left. For a man hunted like an animal, that kind of trust must feel impossible. I could have brought Sheriff Cole Hardin here yesterday, she murmured, but I didn't. Something shifted in his eyes, not trust, but recognition, a careful concession. Slowly, Tarek lowered himself into the broken chair and stretched out his injured leg. Sable knelt beside him, placing her revolver on the floor where she could still reach it. The filthy bandage he'd used was soaked through with blood and grit. This needs to come off, she said, reaching for the knife at her belt. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising force. What are you doing? Cutting away the bandage, she answered calmly, though her heartbeat thudded in her ears. His grip was firm, calloused, a warrior's hand. Unless you'd rather I rip it off. After a moment, he released her. My apologies. Sable worked quietly, slicing through the hardened cloth. The wound beneath was angry, but not as catastrophic as she'd feared. The bullet had passed through the thick muscle of his thigh, sparing bone and artery. But infection could stalk a man faster than an army in this desert. This is going to burn, she warned, uncorking the whiskey. Tarek nodded once, unmoving. Not a twitch crossed his face as she poured the liquor over the torn flesh, though she knew it must have felt like fire. Only the tightening near his eyes and a steady, controlled breath gave him away. As she cleaned and wrapped the wound, Sable found herself acutely aware of him, in a way she couldn't quite name. The strong, lean muscle beneath her hands. The scent of him, smoke and sage and sun-baked earth. The slow, measured rhythm of his breathing. Where did you learn English? She asked, needing to break the strange pull tightening between them. At the mission school, he said evenly. When I was a boy. There was weight beneath the simple words. Before I returned to my people. You chose to go back, she asked softly. Children taken to mission schools were often held there, taught to forget everything that made them Apache. A faint, bitter smile touched his mouth. I escaped, after 3 years of being told my language was wicked, and my gods were lies. Sable tied the fresh bandage neatly. There, keep it as clean and dry as you can. She stood brushing dust from her skirt. How were you wounded? Tarek's expression hardened. Iron Spur troopers. They've hunted me ever since the deaths at Fletcher Ranch. The massacre you say you didn't commit. I don't say it, he replied quietly. It's the truth. His eyes locked on hers, and something in them caught her breath. I have taken lives, Sable Wynrow. I won't pretend otherwise, but I have never harmed women or children. Then why does every lawman in the territory claim you did? She countered, folding her arms as she leaned against the table. Because someone must be blamed. Bitterness edged his voice now. Because it's easier to chase down one Apache than admit soldiers in blue might slaughter a family and frame us for it. The weight of that accusation settled between them like a storm cloud. That's a grave thing to say about United States soldiers. Is it so hard to believe? He motioned toward his wounded leg. This came from men who fired without a word, without a question. Men who would have put another bullet in my skull if I hadn't escaped. Sable wanted to deny it to defend the institutions she'd been raised to trust. But she'd seen enough to know a uniform didn't guarantee decency, and even a badge, yes. Even Sheriff Cole Hardin's didn't always guarantee justice. My father believes you're guilty, she said quietly. Your father sees what he expects to see. Tarek's voice held no accusation, only a weary certainty. As most men do. And what do you see when you look at me? The question escaped Sable Wynrow before she could stop it. He watched her for a long moment, his dark gaze unreadable. I see a woman standing in two worlds, he said quietly, torn between what she was raised to believe and what her heart is beginning to understand. The honesty of it rattled her. You don't know me. Perhaps not. That faint, almost teasing smile flickered again. But you're here. And that simple truth cut straight through her. Why was she here again? What force had pulled her back to this outlawed Apache, risking her reputation, her father's trust, maybe even her own life? Sable gathered the dirty bandages, turning away from the intensity of his gaze. I should go. I told my father I was visiting Agnes Crowley for more headache powder. If I stay too long, he'll get suspicious. Will you return? He asked it lightly, but she heard the tension underneath. She paused. The sensible answer, the safe answer, was no. She had already tended his wounds, already overstepped every boundary she'd ever been taught. But in her heart, she already knew. Yes, she said softly. In 2 days. I can't slip away sooner without drawing questions. Tarek nodded, accepting this without pushing for more. As she gathered her supplies, he reached beneath his shirt and drew out the silver medallion she had glimpsed before. In the dim shack light, she finally saw the engraving, clearly an intricately etched mountain lion. If I am gone when you return, he said, holding it toward her, take this, to remember. Sable stared at it. That's the piece they claim marks you as the raid leader. If I'm found without it, they'll say I threw it away to avoid being identified. His hand remained outstretched. It belonged to my father. It is the only part of him I have left. The weight of the gesture struck her deep. This wasn't a trinket, it was his lineage, his blood, his past. Slowly she reached out. Her fingers brushed his as she accepted the medallion. It felt heavy in her palm, still warm from his skin. I'll keep it safe, she promised, tucking it into her pocket. But I expect to give it back to you myself. As she mounted Cinder for the ride home, Sable could feel Tarek's gaze following her, a feeling both unsettling and strangely exhilarating. The medallion pressed against her thigh, a secret with the power to ruin them both. 5 visits turned into 10. 10 slipped into 20. With each trip to the line shack, Sable told herself it would be the last once he was healed. once he could travel. But as summer heat faded into the crisp breath of early autumn, she found herself inventing elaborate excuses to steal time away from town. Tarek's leg had healed cleanly, the angry wound fading into a pale scar across his thigh. He no longer relied on the crutch. He moved now with a smooth, quiet grace she imagined he'd always had. And though she kept insisting she came only to ensure his recovery, the lie crumbled every time she repeated it. The truth was frightening in its simplicity. She wanted to be with him. That morning when she approached the lion shack, she found him outside sitting on a flat, sun-warmed rock. His face was turned toward the light, his hair neatly braided with a single hawk feather woven in. The sight made Sable unexpectedly aware of herself, the simple blue dress she'd chosen. Instead of riding clothes, the careful way she'd pinned her hair. "You're early today," he said, his soft accent brushing across the words like a warm current down her spine. "Father's riding to Santa Fe with 2 of the Canyon Ridge posse. He won't be back until tomorrow." She pulled a bundle from her saddlebag. "I brought fresh cornbread, and this." From another pouch she produced a small leather-bound book. Curiosity flickered across his face. Over the past weeks they had fallen into a ritual. Sable would bring a book, often poetry or frontier tales, and read aloud while Tarek listened, asking quiet questions about unfamiliar words or ideas. What began as a way to fill silences had grown into something deeper, an exchange of worlds. "Wordsworth today?" he asked, recognizing the cover. Sable smiled, pleased he remembered. "I thought we could sit by the creek. It's cooler there." A narrow stream lay a short distance from the shack, lined with tall cottonwoods that offered shade from the harsh New Mexico sun. It was a place they had visited often, a quiet meeting ground between their lives. They walked in easy silence, Sable leading Cinder by the reins. The mare had long since grown used to Tarek's quiet presence. Like her rider, Cinder no longer shied away from what she'd once been taught to fear. Down by the creek, Sable Wynrow laid a small blanket beneath the broadest cottonwood. The gentle home-like motion struck her unexpectedly. How natural it had become to share this hidden place with him. How easily their companionship had settled into her life. "Tell me of the town," Tarek said, once they were seated. "What news?" It was another of their unspoken rituals. Sable described the latest gossip from Cimarron, always harmless, always careful to skirt anything tied to the search for him. She knew he listened partly for his own safety, but she had also come to believe he truly wanted to understand the world she came from. "Mrs. Hargrove's daughter is engaged to the banker's boy," she said. "Folks are scandalized she's only 16. But Mrs. Hargrove insists a wealthy husband now is better than ending up a spinster later." "And what does the daughter say?" The question made Sable smile. While most people in town fretted over propriety or dowries, Tarek always asked about the person with the least voice in the decision. "Sarah seems content enough. Still, I can't imagine marrying so young." She plucked a blade of grass and twisted it idly. "My father expects I'll wed Edwin Hale when he returns from law school next spring." She hadn't meant to confess that, not even to herself, but the words tumbled out easily around Tarek, as so many truths had in recent weeks. His expression didn't change yet. She saw the faint stiffening in his shoulders. "Is that what you want?" he asked quietly. "It's what's expected." Sable kept her gaze on the grass between her fingers. "Edwin is respectable, educated. Folks say he'll be a judge someday. My father calls it a perfect match." You still didn't answer. The gentle insistence in his tone forced her to look at him. Tarek watched her with that steady, unguarded intensity that always seemed to cut straight through her practiced composure. "No," she said softly. "It isn't what I want. Edwin is a good man, I suppose. But he talks at me, never to me. He has my future mapped out in neat lines, and not once has he asked what I might choose for myself." "And what do you want, Sable Wynrow?" The question hovered between them, carrying far more meaning than the simple words suggested. Her pulse tripped. What did she want a year ago? She would have answered easily. a proper home, a respectable husband, children, a life molded by expectations. Now, I want to choose my own path, she whispered. I want to see what lies beyond the boundaries others drew for me. I want you, her heart cried. The truth struck her with breathtaking force. Somewhere between their conversations, their silences, and the fragile trust they'd built, she had fallen in love with him. Tarek, the Apache man her father had sworn to bring to justice. Tarek seemed to read the confession forming behind her eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for her hand. His touch was warm, his skin rough from a life carved out beneath sun and wind. In my tongue, he murmured, there is a word, Salgai. It means where water cuts through white stone. But it also means a place where two separate streams join into one river, where what was divided becomes whole. Sable stared at their joined hands, his deep bronze against her sun-weathered paleness. Is that possible for people like us? She asked. I don't know, he said truthfully. But I have never met anyone like you. Someone who sees with her heart as well as her eyes. Something inside her broke open at his words. Before she could think, before fear could stop her, Sable leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. For a heartbeat, Tarek went utterly still, and she feared she had made a terrible mistake. But then his hand rose to cradle her cheek, and he kissed her back with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. It was nothing like the rushed, awkward kisses Edwin Hale had stolen behind the church. Those had left her cold, uncertain. This was warmth and lightning and the startling sense of coming home to something she had never known she'd been searching for. When they finally drew apart, she kept her eyes closed, afraid of what she might see, afraid too of the enormity of what she had just done. Sable, the way he spoke her name, like a vow, like a prayer, made her look up. Wonder shone in his gaze, and beneath it, a cautious joy that echoed the upheaval inside her. I shouldn't have done that, she whispered, though she could not regret it. Perhaps not, he said softly. But I'm glad you did. A sharp crack of a breaking twig cut through the moment. They jumped apart instantly. Cinder snorted nervously, tugging at her tether. Sable's hand flew to her revolver as Tarek rose in one fluid motion, positioning himself between her and whatever threatened. A jackrabbit shot out from the brush, freezing for a split second before bolting into the scrub. Sable Wynrow let out a shaky breath, the fragile spell between them shattered. Reality rushed back in a hard, cold truth that belonged to the desert more than any outlaw tale. The danger, the impossibility of what had passed between her and Tarek came crashing down like a falling ridge stone. I should go, she murmured, rising to her feet and brushing dust from her skirt. Her hands trembling just enough for him to notice. Tarek inclined his head, though regret darkened his features. It isn't safe for you to be near me. If your father knew, Sheriff Cole Hardin would never understand. The truth hit her like a hammer strike. Sheriff Hardin lived by rules carved from stone, no room for questions, no room for mercy, certainly no room for something like this. Sable gathered the untouched book and blanket with quick, jittery motions. Fear and confusion, tangled with the lingering memory of Tarek's kiss. What madness had she stepped into? What future had she imagined during that single moment of surrender? Tarek reached for her wrist, his touch gentle but steady. Sable, don't torment yourself. He paused, searching for words, speaking finally with quiet weight. What's happening between us, it's like water carving its way through rock. Not chosen, just true. Even in turmoil, his words touched something deep inside her. That was what drew her to him, the way he saw the world, the way he found meaning in places others ignored. I don't regret it, she whispered. But I'm scared, Tarek. For you. For what might happen if anyone discovers us. He nodded, understanding everything she dared not speak aloud. For me, the cost would be far worse, he admitted. A white woman, with an Apache man wanted for murder. Violence would come fast. I've stayed near Samar for too long, he added, eyes steady. The longer I remain, the more danger grows. Fear squeezed Sable's heart. You're leaving soon. Others from my band escaped the reservation. They've gone south toward Mexico. I told them I'd meet them once it was safe. The idea of him gone, of never seeing him again, felt like a knife twisting slowly. But she knew he was right. Every day he remained put him in the sights of the Iron Spur troopers and her father's Canyon Ridge posse. When she whispered, after the next full moon, the nights will be dark enough to travel unseen. He hesitated. 3 days. Just 3 days left with him. Without thinking, Sable reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver medallion he'd given her. She carried it everywhere, like a secret heartbeat. You should take this back, she whispered. For the road. Tarek gently folded her fingers around it. No, keep it. A piece of me with you. His gaze held hers with fierce tenderness. I will return for it, Sable Wynrow. I will return. She wanted to believe him more than anything she had ever wanted. Yet when she mounted Cinder for the ride home, the medallion weighed heavy in her pocket like a stone, dragging her heart downward. Sable had always imagined heartbreak as loud a storm of tears, fits of despair. She never expected this quiet ache, this strange ability to move through her days with smiles that never touched her eyes. 2 days had passed since she last saw Tarek. Tomorrow he would ride south and she would be left with nothing but memories and a silver token she dared not wear. One more meeting, one last goodbye. She spent the night rehearsing words she knew would fail her. At dawn, she prepared for the day with the numb precision of someone trying not to feel. Sheriff Hardin had returned from Santa Fe late in the night, stirring chaos until well past midnight. We've got the bastard, he'd declared, slamming his fist onto the table. That Apache devil who led the Fletcher Ranch raid. Iron Spur troopers spotted him near the old Wilson place. We ride at noon. The words froze her blood. Sable forced herself to ask, are they certain it was him? Her voice stayed steady by sheer will. Got a clear look, the sheriff said proudly. Tall Apache carried a silver medallion. Matches the description. Been hiding out there for weeks. Slippery as an eel, but he's wounded, won't get far. She excused herself, barely reaching her room before panic crushed her. How had Tarek been spotted? Had she been careless? Had she led danger to him? The thought nearly broke her. Now with the house stirring awake and noon approaching, only one truth filled her mind. Her father and his men would ride soon, and she had to reach Tarek first. She had to reach Tarek before noon had to warn him to run. Now, not wait for the cover of darkness. The medallion rested against her chest where she'd hidden it on a leather cord beneath her high-collared blouse, a constant reminder of everything she stood to lose. Sable, her father's voice carried from the kitchen doorway where she stood kneading dough with movements that felt distant and mechanical. Sheriff Cole Hardin filled the frame, broad-shouldered, weathered by decades beneath the New Mexico sun. Silver streaked his temples now, though his blue eyes, so much like her own, remained sharp as a hawk's. You're up early, he noted. Couldn't sleep, she answered, forcing a practiced smile. Figured I'd start the baking. He studied her face with the same piercing scrutiny that made outlaws tremble under questioning. You feeling all right? You've been awful quiet since I got home. Just tired. Sable lied. Think I've got a headache coming on. I thought I might ride out to Agnes Crowley's later for some of her willow bark tea. That excuse had served her well before. It would serve her again. Agnes's cabin sat in the same general direction as the line shack, perfect cover for what she truly intended. Sheriff Hardin grunted in approval. Don't stray far. Not with that Apache still running loose. I'll be careful, she said, though the promise nearly stuck in her throat. Each lie felt like a tiny betrayal, not just of her father, but of the obedient daughter she had once believed herself to be. He poured coffee from the stovetop. We'll have that murderer by sundown, he declared. Then this town can finally sleep easy. Sable kept her gaze fixed on the doe, kneading it with too much force. What if... She began, then faltered. What if what he asked, his tone turning alert? What if he's not what folks say? What if he didn't lead the attack on Fletcher Ranch? Her father's cup paused midway to his lips. What kind of talk is that? I just mean, we never proved he was responsible. What if someone else was Sheriff Hardin, set his cup down with cold deliberation? I've worn this badge 15 years. In that time I've learned one thing. Indians, especially Apache, are savages. They understand one language force. His voice hardened. 16 people died at Fletcher Ranch. Women. Children. I saw the bodies. Don't you start going soft over some murdering redskin. The brutality of his words hit her like a lash. How had she gone her whole life without seeing this side of him? Or had she always known and simply accepted it as truth? I should get this bread in the oven, she murmured, unable to meet his eyes. He watched her another moment, then dismissed his concern. I'll be at the office. Be back from Agnes's by midday. I don't want you out while we're hunting. When the door shut behind him, Sable dropped all pretense of baking. She changed swiftly into her riding clothes, buckled her revolver at her hip, and stuffed provisions into a small bag. If she moved fast, she could reach Tarek before her father mustered the Canyon Ridge posse. The morning air was sharp with the first hints of fall as she rode out. Sable urged Cinder harder than she ever dared, urgency hammering in her chest. The familiar desert swept past red rock bluffs, sagebrush, the clean bite of juniper in the wind. But as she neared the line shack, dread curled low in her belly. Something felt wrong. Too still, too watchful. She slowed Cinder to a cautious walk. The shack door hung slightly ajar, swaying with the morning breeze. Tarek never left it open. Sable dismounted, revolver drawn. Tarek, she called softly. Approaching with every sense sharpened. No answer. She pushed the door wider. The dim cabin looked unchanged at first glance, the tin cup she'd brought him still on the table, the blanket folded neatly on the cot. Then she saw it. A dark stain on the floorboards near the back room. Blood. Tarek! She cried, panic clawing at her chest. A faint sound whispered from the storage room. She moved toward it, breath-tight weapon, ready, hope and terror wrestling inside her. There he was, slumped against the far wall, one hand pressed to his side, where blood seeped steadily through his shirt. His usually warm bronze complexion had turned pale with pain. Sable. His voice was barely the ghost of a whisper. You shouldn't have come. It isn't safe. He forced the words out, breath tight with pain. Sable dropped to her knees beside him, setting her revolver aside as she inspected the wound. What happened? Who did this to you, Iron Spur troopers? He rasped. He winced when she gently lifted his hand, revealing a deep knife gash carved just beneath his ribs. Yesterday at sunset. I thought I'd shaken them in the rocks, but one doubled back. Sable's stomach turned. A knife wound like this was worse than a bullet. Deeper, dirtier, far more dangerous. Why didn't you head south the moment they lost your trail? Couldn't travel. Not like this. His eyes found hers, dark and steady, even through the pain. And I promised I'd see you again. That simple truth, spoken with such quiet resolve, cracked something open in her chest. Her eyes burned, but she swallowed the tears down. Emotion wouldn't save him. Action would. My father knows you're close, she said, tearing a strip from her petticoat to make a fresh bandage. Not your exact location, but close enough. He and the Canyon Ridge posse ride at noon. They're hunting you. A faint, weary smile touched Tarek's lips. Then my time's run out. No! Sable snapped, fire surging through her. I won't let them take you. What are you willing to do, Sable Wynrow? He asked softly. Would you raise a gun on your own father to shield an Apache? The question hung between them like a blade. Would she? Could she? Could she stand against her entire world for the man who had shattered everything she thought she knew? It won't come to that, she insisted. You're leaving. Now. And I'm going with you. Tarek's eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm going south with you? Across the border. Away from this place. As she said the words, they settled inside her with undeniable clarity, final and unshakable. You cannot, he protested. Your life, your family. What life? She cut in, voice cracking. Marrying Edwin Hale, becoming the perfect judge's wife, hosting socials and pretending. I don't see the injustice choking this town. She shook her head. That girl who followed rules, who believed everything she was told, she died the day I found you in the desert. Your father will never stop hunting us, Tarek warned gently. He will see your choice as a betrayal. Then we go further, she said simply. When the bandage was tied, Sable eased him upright. He leaned heavily against her, his breath tight but controlled. The wound was bad but survivable if they kept infection at bay. There's a stallion behind the shack, he murmured. A young Apache-trained pony. I've worked with him for weeks. He'll carry me. Sable nodded. I'll gather supplies. We leave in 10 minutes. Despite the storm inside her, her hands moved with calm precision as she packed what little the shack offered. She should have been terrified she was abandoning her home, her father, everything she had ever known. But instead she felt only certainty, as if every choice in her life had led her to this single moment. The silver medallion rested warm against her skin, a reminder of the woman she was choosing to become. When she returned to help Tarek mount the stallion, a sleek clay bank with a white blaze, he caught her hand. Sable. Are you truly certain? Once we leave, there's no going back. She looked toward the distant outline of Cimarron through the morning haze. The town had been her world for 22 years. Her cage for 22 years. I'm certain, she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. My life is tied to yours now, no matter where that road leads. They rode south, weaving through the thinning scrubland, hugging the shadows cast by jagged rock spines. Even wounded Tarek sat straight on the stallion's back, his gaze sweeping the horizon, alert, unyielding, ready for whatever came next. Sable led the way through the scrub, guiding them toward the hidden chain of caves she had spoken of. The sun kept climbing, relentless and sharp, burning across the vast canyon, as if it aimed to strip the land bare. By midday, the very hour Sheriff Cole Hardin would be gathering the Canyon Ridge posse, Sable and Tarek reached the entrance of the Red Rock Gorge. Towering canyon walls rose on both sides, streaked with molten oranges and deep scarlets, each layer a record of centuries, carved by wind and time. The caves clung to the eastern wall, reachable only by a narrow, twisting trail that hugged the cliff's face. We'll stop here, Sable decided, helping Tarek slide from the stallion's back into the shelter of a massive boulder. The horses need water and your wound needs tending. A thin spring bubbled from the base of the canyon wall, forming a shallow, glass-smooth pool before vanishing again into the earth. Sable led the horses to drink while Tarek eased himself down, bracing his back against the rock. How far to the border from here? He asked, as she removed the blood-soaked bandage. 2 days' ride if we push, she answered, frowning at the fresh stains spreading across the cloth. Longer with your injury, but we have to slow this bleeding. Tarek nodded toward a low, scraggly plant growing near the spring. The sage. Crush the leaves, it makes a poultice. Sable followed his instructions, grinding the leaves until they released their sharp scent, then pressing the mixture against his wound. As she wrapped the fresh dressing, their eyes met, and despite the danger pressing in on every side, a rush of emotion swelled so strong it stole her breath. I never believed I'd meet someone like you, Tarek murmured, lifting a hand to her cheek. A woman brave enough to see beyond the borders her world drew for her. Sable leaned into his touch. You showed me those borders were nothing but lines I allowed to define me. A distant echo rolled through the canyon hoofbeats. Sable froze. Her pulse leapt. That can't be my father's posse, not this fast. No, Tarek said, his voice tightening as he listened. Iron Spur troopers. They must have watched the shack waiting for me to return. Sable lunged for her revolver, heart racing. The caves offered cover and a high vantage, but the climb would be brutal, given Tarek's condition. We have to move. Now. She hauled him to his feet, ignoring his clenched jaw as pain surged through him. Can you climb to the caves? He looked at the steep switchback trail, then nodded once. I can make it. They tied Cinder and the stallion in a small hollow and prayed the horses would stay quiet. The climb was grueling. Twice Tarek staggered, nearly collapsing, but each time he forced himself onward, driven by survival more than strength. They reached the largest cave just as 4 Iron Spur troopers appeared at the canyon's mouth. From their vantage high above, Sable and Tarek watched the soldiers dismount, scanning the ground with the practiced precision of seasoned trackers. They'll pick up our trail, Tarek whispered. As if summoned by the words, Cinder let out a soft, anxious nicker from the hollow. One of the troopers jerked his head up. He pointed toward the sound. Something's over there. Check that hollow. Sable's grip tightened on her revolver. If they find us, they won't take me alive, Tarek said quietly. His voice cracked as he added, and you. Sable, they'll show you no mercy if they catch you at my side. The truth of it was a blow to the chest. To these men, she would not be the sheriff's daughter. She would be a traitor standing with an Apache warrior, an unforgivable crime. No trial, no questions. Just frontier justice delivered in the dust. The soldiers had reached the hollow now. One held up Cinder's reins, examining the familiar Whitaker brand burned into the saddle. This is Sheriff Hardin's daughter's mare, a soldier shouted. What the hell is she doing out here? Spread out, the leader barked. Find them. The Apache's wounded. He can't be far. Sable's mind snapped to a decision, wild and desperate. I'll draw them off. You escape while they chase me. No. Tarek's hand clamped around her wrist, his grip iron strong despite his weakness. I will not leave you. They won't harm me. They wouldn't dare hurt the sheriff's daughter. You truly believe that his gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. After what you've done, after choosing me, your father's badge won't save you now. Soldiers began climbing toward the caves, boots scraping rock rifles, slung eyes sharp. Time was evaporating. Then we make our stand together, Sable said, lifting her revolver. But Tarek's hand closed over hers, lowering the barrel. There is another way. From beneath his shirt, he drew a small leather pouch. Signal smoke, he said. The one thing that might reach the only people who could help them. His people. The Apache. My people use this to call across great distances, Tarek said, holding the small leather pouch with care. If my band is anywhere within 20 miles, they'll see the smoke and come. Hope surged in Sable's chest. How soon? Not soon enough to stop these Iron Spur troopers, he admitted. But maybe soon enough to save us from what comes afterward. Understanding washed over her like ice. He meant her father, Sheriff Cole Hardin, and the larger Canyon Ridge posse that would soon sweep the territory. If they could survive the next few minutes, help might reach them before her father did. Sable nodded once. Do it! While Tarek worked mixing herbs and resin into a tight bundle that would burn blue-white, Sable positioned herself at the cave entrance, revolver clenched in hand. The soldiers were already halfway up the trail. Rifles lifted, boots scraping against rock. When I light it, Tarek murmured, the smoke will rise high. They'll know exactly where we are. How long does it have to burn? 3 minutes. No more. Sable inhaled sharply. Then we hold them off for 3 minutes. Tarek met her gaze. No fear, only fierce resolve. We will hold. With a swift strike of flint, the bundle burst into a steady column of pale blue smoke that poured upward, stark against the canyon walls. The reaction below was immediate. There, the caves. One soldier shouted. "It's him, the Apache," another cried, lifting his rifle. The first bullet shattered rock inches from Sable's head. She ducked back, dust stinging her eyes as several more shots cracked across the stone entrance. "They're pinned down." Someone yelled from below. "Buck Rollins, circle north. We'll keep pressure on them." Sable peeked out carefully. The blue smoke continued to rise, forming a beacon that seemed to scrape the heavens. 1 minute gone, 2 left. "They're flanking us," she warned. "We stand our ground." Tarek answered voice, tight but steady. The smoke must finish. Gunfire erupted again, stone fragments slicing the cave walls. Sable squeezed off a warning shot, not meant to hit, just to keep the soldiers cautious. Only 5 bullets remained. Movement flickered along a narrow ledge, Buck Rollins edging closer with determined steps. Sable fired again, forcing him flat against the canyon wall. 2 minutes, Tarek murmured, watching the smoke thin. Below, the troopers had dug in behind rocks, settling for a siege. They knew patience was their ally. But Sable and Tarek needed only 60 more seconds. Sable's heart hammered. 3 bullets left. Tarek swayed where he knelt, fresh blood seeping through the bandage, but his eyes stayed alert, unyielding. A rifle shot struck near Sable's face, sending shards of stone slashing across her cheek. Warm blood trickled down, but she barely felt it. Everything inside her narrowed to the thinning trail of smoke. Now Tarek said at last, "It is done." The smoke faded, its message already carried across the sky. Sable looked toward the back of the cave system. "We have to reach the south exit, the chimney. We can get to the canyon rim through there." Before they could move, a sharp rifle crack split the air, not from below, but from above. The bullet slammed into the ground near the soldiers, scattering them into cover. "What the hell?" one shouted. More shots followed, rapid and precise, coming from the canyon rim. Sable grabbed Tarek's arm, eyes widening. "Someone's up there!" Figures appeared along the rim, at least a dozen. Mounted riders, bows slung across their backs, rifles glinting. Apache. Tarek's people had answered the signal, and far sooner than either had dared hope. "Come," Tarek said, a fierce urgency lighting his features. "They're giving us cover. We must reach the rim now." They plunged deeper into the cave. Tarek led despite his wound, relying on instinct and memory through the dark maze. The chimney narrowed into a steep rocky shaft, climbable but brutal. Sable went after him, muscles screaming, breath burning. Below them, the gunfire intensified, Apache volleys raining down on the iron spur troopers. Halfway up, Tarek faltered, his wound tearing open. Blood slicked the rocks, but he forced himself onward with a warrior's will. Higher, higher. Toward the faint circle of daylight. At last they reached the rim. Apache warriors leaned down, gripping Sable's wrists, then Tarek's, lifting them into safety. They had made it. Strong, steady hands hauled them onto the canyon rim. Apache. Warriors gathering around with guarded eyes, taking in the sight of a white woman beside an injured warrior they considered their own. Sable felt her breath catch, surrounded by hardened riders whose silence carried a lifetime of battles and loss. One man stepped forward, older than the rest, his braids streaked with gray, his face carved with the weight of leadership. He spoke quickly to Tarek in their native tongue, pointing toward the canyon where the gunfire had finally died away. Tarek answered, his voice ragged, but still carrying the authority of a man who refused to fall. Switching to English, he murmured, "Sable. This is Koda, my mother's brother. He says the Iron Spur troopers have pulled back, but they'll return with more men." Koda studied Sable with eyes sharp enough to cut stone. "Sheriff's daughter," he said in accented English. "Why you stand with my sister's son?" Before she could form an answer, Tarek swayed violently. 2 warriors rushed in, catching him before his legs gave way. "He needs help," Sable said, panic tightening her voice. "The wound is deep. He's losing too much blood." Koda gave a single decisive nod. We go, now. Commands barked across the rim, and within moments the Apache riders mounted up smooth practice movements, honed by years of fleeing soldiers and surviving the unforgiving land. Someone brought Tarek to a pony already fitted with a blanket. Another warrior swung down and offered Sable a spare mount. As she climbed into the saddle, Sable turned back toward the distant haze where Cimarron lay. Her father, Sheriff Cole Hardin, would have discovered her disappearance by now. He would not rest, not until she was found, or avenged. In his eyes, she was already lost. Koda guided his pony beside hers, the wind tugging at his braids. We ride south, he said. Cross border before dark. No stopping. Sable nodded. I understand. But Koda wasn't finished. His gaze sharpened, slicing straight through her. Why, white woman, throw away her life for Apache, for enemy of her people? Sable reached instinctively to the silver medallion hanging warm beneath her shirt. She lifted it into the sunlight, and its etched mountain lion gleaming like a living flame. Recognition flashed across Koda's face. Because some things are worth more than fear, she said quietly. And because I finally learned to see with my heart, not just with the rules I was raised on. Whatever Koda read in her face, conviction, courage, or simply truth, seemed enough. He gave a curt nod and turned his pony toward the front of the riders. Sable urged her horse closer to Tarek's. His body swayed with each step, pain pulling lines across his face. She reached out, steadying him, refusing to let him slip away after everything they had fought to protect. Stay with me, she whispered fiercely. We've come too far to lose each other now. His hand found hers fingers, lacing with a certainty that stole her breath. Always, he murmured, his eyes dark and unwavering, locked on hers with the same unspoken promise that first bound them together beneath the desert sun. Our rivers are joined, Sable Wynrow. Where you go, I go. As the Apache column rode south toward the border, toward danger, toward a future neither could predict, Sable felt the weight of her old world fall away behind her. Ahead lay hardship, pursuit, uncertainty, but also freedom and love. Under the blazing stretch of sky, their shadows rode long across the ancient land. Two silhouettes moving side by side separate, no longer flowing together like twin streams becoming a single relentless river. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.